RugbyRenegade.com, the #1 online strength and conditioning program for rugby. Are you ready to get bigger, stronger, fitter, and faster and dominate your opposition? Welcome to the Rugby Renegade podcast, where we build machines.
Hello and welcome to episode 17 of the Rugby Renegade podcast. My name's Jamie Bain and today I interview Chris Toombs, Head of Strength and Conditioning at Northamptonshire Cricket. Chris is a great guy, really open and shares so much information. I think it's a really good one if you're a wannabe strength and conditioning coach. Loads of really good insights into his philosophy and lessons that he's learned over his nearly 20-year career in strength and conditioning in professional sport. And on the rugby side, although he works in cricket now, he's spent a lot of time in rugby. He's worked at Leicester Tigers for a number of years and then Cardiff Blues for a long period of time and won a few trophies when he was there. And then worked over in the States with rugby and other sports. So seriously good podcast, loads of good information. So have a listen and let us know what you think. Hi Chris, welcome to the Rugby Renegade podcast. It's great to have you on.
Pleasure to be on. Thanks very much for the invite.
Oh, my pleasure. Why don't we start by you sort of telling our listeners a little bit about yourself, about your background, how you got into strength and conditioning and some of the clubs, so certainly rugby clubs you work with, and I know you work with other sports, just sort of allude to that a bit.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Well, to cut the long story short, been involved in strength and conditioning nearly 20 years. Started my first real kind of rugby S&C with the English Institute of Sport when it was kind of more of a consultancy-based operation. I worked with some of the England women's rugby players in the early 2000s, and from there ended up being lucky enough to get an interview with Leicester Tigers, and pretty much within a transitional period of time when the Tigers were doing some quite cool stuff and England were winning the World Cup, ended up working across the academy and the first team only for 2 seasons before I made the transition over to the Cardiff Blues, where I spent 9 seasons. Pretty much a quite evolving role, which included initially working predominantly with the academy age grade players, and then a sort of fully fledged senior role for the last 4 or 5 years of my career there. Decided to take a big jump across the pond to the United States. Ended up working for a commercial business that was pretty much tasked with growing rugby in North America for 2 years, and within that role was lucky enough to do some consultancy with USA national teams and prepare individual athletes for the Rio Games. And I was really lucky to obviously have involvement with one player particularly who ended up going to Rio on the women's program, which was very, very cool. And for various other reasons, made the jump back across the pond to Northamptonshire County Cricket Club, which is where I'm currently at, and had a successful year there, winning the national T20 competition during the summer. I think that's the very short version of 16 years in professional sport.
Yeah, well, congratulations on winning the trophy. And I believe you had a couple of trophies at the Blues as well when you were there?
Yeah, so had some good times there. Really, really, quite special memories. Winning the EDF Cup. Sorry, I know you work for Gloucester. Beating Gloucester at Twickenham was a career highlight with some really, really good players at the time, 2008-9 or 2009-10, I'm not sure. And then Amlin Cup in 2010, beating Toulon out in Marseille was a pretty special memory as well. And from that point on, really the Blues, some really, really world class players and some young Welsh talent that's subsequently developed into current captain of Wales and the Lions, and the likes of Jamie Roberts, Lee Halfpenny, Bradley Davis, some pretty stellar names now on the sort of Welsh team sheet came through the sort of Blues system, and there was a kind of spine of really, really high quality sort of overseas players at the time, and most of them coming from New Zealand, and a couple of Tongans who really sort of with a backbone of quite a successful time for the Blues at that point.
Yeah, for sure. And there's something I've got to ask is, you just remind me talking about some of your successes there. Were you there during I think it was Heineken Cup against Leicester when it went to like a drop goal shootout?
Yes, I was. The tears and the agony of watching a rugby penalty shootout in the semi-finals of Heineken Cup 2009-10 or 2008-9. Sorry. Yeah, unbelievable experience at that point. I think, if my memory serves me correctly, Leicester Tigers dominated the game. I think we were 26-12 down with 6 minutes to go, and I think Jamie Roberts and Tom James both scored length of the field tries, and Ben Blair nailed 2 sideline conversions in the last 5 minutes of the game to draw. Extra time was agonising, and then the penalty shootout was just brutal. And 50-odd thousand in the Millennium Stadium watching Cardiff Blues was surreal. And it's bittersweet because obviously the Tigers was my old team, and I genuinely think that at the time, I think if the Blues had won that game, I think it was just at the start of the Leinster sort of ascendancy in Europe. I genuinely think the Blues would have beaten Leinster in the Heineken Cup final, but that's the margins in sport. I think the hero and the villain, Martin Williams, was like a rock star and obviously a superb player for Wales and for the Lions and for the Blues. Missed one in front of goal, and I think even the goal kicker said that the pressure for that particular sort of shootout was absolutely horrific. Yeah. But I was there, mate. I was there. That whole,
Yeah, I was there in the crowd. I remember it very well, but I imagine you would have been even more tense.
Oh. No. I have actually. Funnily enough, I was looking through some archive footage recently to do a presentation on a PowerPoint, and there's a photo of me. I don't know who captured it. There's literally the minute that Martin misses a kick, and he's basically put his shirt to his face, and there's me in the background, and obviously I'm not putting the best face. But funnily enough, I found that. So thanks for reminding me, Jamie. Appreciate it.
Sorry about that. Let's move on from that quickly. Let's obviously you said your time over in the States. We'll avoid the current political climate. But what was it like over there, and what have you learnt that you've taken with you in your career?
Oh, I think it was a fabulous experience from my own personal and professional career wise. I think the reality is that I think a lot of people think it's the real next growth marketplace for rugby particularly, and there's a huge amount of interest in the sport, particularly the shorter version of the game. The sevens format, I think, is something that's going to suit American marketplaces particularly more so than possibly the 15s game. But the irony is, as I was leaving to come back to the UK, the rugby, I think Pro Rugby USA got formed, and the 6 pro teams now in the country. But I think there's just this massive opportunity for growing a sport that's physical domination is required. Obviously that confrontational element that's going to try and come up against the juggernaut that is American football, and that goes through kind of the cultural, layers of American sports, high school, college. And obviously the pro sport is just a huge, huge business in America. And I think unless you've been there to enjoy and get exposed to that, I don't think people in the kind of the UK or Europe or even in sort of Australia or New Zealand really see American football is just absolutely enormous. And I think the lessons learned from my point of view were the kind of crossover opportunities that may present themselves going forward in the American marketplace. A lot of American football teams are starting to look at rugby to learn off, and I think potentially on the flip side of that, a lot of rugby teams could probably learn some lessons from American football in terms of the way sort of businesses are organised, possibly. But I was very, very fortunate that I've got a kind of long-standing professional kind of colleague who works at the Seattle Seahawks, who, for those who are listening who don't know much about American football, they're probably a top 5 franchise in the American National Football League, and just getting exposed to sort of that environment and how fabulous their facilities are, and the sort of the larger scale kind of operation that works within an American football franchise is quite fascinating for me, and I really enjoyed the interaction there. And the company that I work for has just started to do some sort of tackle analysis for American football to try and help them be more efficient and more effective when it comes to the sort of contact area. So I think it's an interesting marketplace, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I've heard similar sort of things as yourself, that they're getting rugby union defence coaches in over to American football teams to look at the way we tackle as well. So it's definitely a two-way street, and they do really seem to be getting involved in the sevens game, which is great. So talking of, you mentioned American football and what we can learn from it, and obviously you're working in cricket at the moment. What can rugby union learn from other sports, in your opinion?
I just think it's having that open-minded sort of attitude to try and take the best from other environments, and you can integrate certain practices into a team structure. And I think one of the things that's apparent from both sports, I mean, the cultural kind of differences and the physical differences between cricket and rugby are obviously pretty pronounced, but the reality of kind of team dynamics, and the older I've got and the more experienced I've got when it comes to the sort of X's and O's of strength and conditioning, I think those are the things that even in sort of popular social media posts that are currently kind of being exposed on Twitter and on those kind of media outlets, I think the reality is that it's those soft skills that are going to be more important. It's that team culture, that kind of the legacy book and the All Blacks that keeps kind of being relayed as like really, really important. And I think the other reality of kind of the current marketplace from a performance-oriented standpoint is technology and its integration is something that's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think the kind of modern-day strength and conditioning coach across every sport has got to integrate monitoring. It's got to integrate the sports science elements that are going to give you that performance advantage. And I think that is where the kind of definitely the sort of American football organizations are going to possibly in the near future steal a march, because they've just got the resources to sort of play around with good levels of technology and integrate them as successfully as possible. But I think it still all boils back down to interpersonal relationships and the coach-athlete interface, and how those kind of concepts, it's not a concept, but how that sort of organizational structure allows for sort of peak performance with kind of basically honest, transparent communication from coaches and players.
Yeah, definitely. I think.
Sorry, hopefully that wasn't too long-winded.
No. I think you're right. We were talking about it at Gloucester the other day, how the industry kind of swings in and out of, or things swing in and out of sort of favour, and more and more technology comes in, and it's all very important, and people kind of over adopt it, for want of a better term, and then after a while they realise how to use it better, more efficiently, and in some ways people go the opposite way and don't use it at all, but then it comes back to using it the best way. But the things, you're exactly right, the things that will never change are having that ability to communicate with coaches and players and understand exactly what you're doing. So definitely some good points. Now, kind of leading in nicely to, always on the podcast we try and get a little bit of an insight into an S&C coach's philosophy, and that's quite a broad thing to talk about. So why don't we sort of say what are kind of the big rocks of your S&C philosophy?
Yeah, no, I think it's like you say, there's many ways to skin a cat, and I think the industry is polarised in some respects with regards to different attitudes and different people's kind of opinions, I'm guessing, on that. But I think anyone who's followed me on social media for a fair few years since my first few tweets, I think not that I've coined it, but it seems to have coined the term strength foundation. And my overall philosophy, I guess, is bound by that, and the realities of strength are not necessarily, just to qualify, not necessarily max strength being the sort of foundational underpinning physical quality that really impacts on all the others when it comes to especially being successful in a confrontational sport like rugby. And a lot of people get mixed up that they just think I'm a kind of washed up old meathead who just loves bashing out max strength. But the reality is we both know that there's lots of different strength qualities along the force velocity curve, and you've got your speed strength, you've got your strength speed, you've got your max strength, and it's blending all of those for the most part to get the most out of physical development of an athlete. And within that kind of conjuncture, you've also got I obviously realise that the speed stimulus is really important, and I think people are kind of swinging one way with the kind of Franz Bosch inspired kind of strength training model. You've obviously got the model where you've got to sprint to expose guys from a resiliency and a robustness kind of perspective. If you don't sprint and then you expect them to sprint in match situations, you're obviously going to ask for trouble. And you've got the kind of hamstring protectionist group, and you've got the industry is polarized with lots and lots of different philosophies. But I think the the reality for me over my kind of tenure as a strength and conditioning coach is that, that's my foundational kind of, I can hang my hat on, the strength foundation, and then obviously you develop a person's strengths and weaknesses, and according to what you see when you do benchmark, then you do your assessments. So I think that's probably it in a shortened format. I don't know if you want any. You want me to expand any further?
No, I think you've summed it up well, and you my previous point you described a lot better in terms of the polarized way, the nature of the industry, and yeah, I think you make a lot of sense. Obviously, the strength foundation, and then on top of that, or even more advanced, look at the individual and what they need, and then that specific strength, where it's max strength, rate force development, power, whatever it is. That's what you train, but obviously strength underpins everything.
I genuinely do believe that, Jamie. And I mean, I think that was one of the things that was really I got nicely exposed to. And I'm not sponsored to plug these guys, but I went to Altus in Arizona last November, out in Arizona, and I got exposed, luckily, to some professional development there with Dan Path and Stu McMillan leading a really interesting program down there from a track and field perspective mainly. But Dan is kind of the Yoda of kind of athlete preparation, and just one thing ran true about that training gap and identifying, work your strengths, but also identify your weaknesses, and obviously try to get them up to the same level as your strengths. And I think that is the strength foundation, plus obviously individual assessments and trying to obviously maximize every single person's individualization. And it's difficult under the constraints of team sport, of finance, of genuine time constraints. There's lots of different challenges in every single sport, but at least if you have that core philosophy, and let's be honest, everybody's philosophy should to some degree evolve with the current state of the industry, but I think it's a difficult situation that you find yourself in when one day, and it's only because his name's on the tip of my tongue, one day the Franz Bosch stuff is all the rage, and the next it's standing on a Bosu ball, scratching your ear and trying to kick the ball with the opposite foot. It's kind of like, obviously that's an extreme example, and none of us are going to take that too seriously. But the reality is, if you don't stand for a core foundation, you can easily get swayed by the kind of latest trends. And both of us know that there's noise on the internet, and there's obviously a filter that you need to kind of. I've integrated lots of Franz's work, incidentally, into my kind of current thinking and my current programming, but I haven't swung exclusively one way or the other, is the point I'm really trying to make.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that I think a lot of maybe young coaches fall into that trap of, wow, this is getting amazing press attention, let's throw all my eggs into that basket, without kind of having that robust philosophy that they can stand by for the most part. I think not wanting to again quote sort of the Stu McMillans of this world, who's obviously highly respected, but I think it's 75% of the program he knows what works, 20% of the program he's pretty sure, but is there some wriggle room there to do something a little bit more innovative, and 5% is right, let's go gut feel and let's do something outrageous that might be like the game breaker. And I think that's the kind of thing that really helped validate my own personal philosophy when I did go and spend some time there.
Yeah.
I thought, I'm pretty comfortable that 75% of what I program will be effective for a lot of good quality athletes across whatever sport. And then you've obviously got your 20% and your 5% where you can essentially, not gamble with an athlete's career, but try to really push the boundaries. And I think that's one thing that us as practitioners have got to do as well. I think if nobody's getting injured in your program, I genuinely think that you might not be pushing the boundaries of possibility. And I think that's the kind of same sort of thing that sort of the Tim Gabbetts of this world will kind of advocate as well. It's like, why don't we push for limit potential rather than stay within the limits, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. And you touched on something there, and it was going to be one of my questions, is kind of advice for upcoming strength coaches in the industry, and something like, as kind of human nature, we always want to see the next big thing, or another advantage we can have in our program. But then the problem is, if you completely change your philosophy overnight, you go to a CPD or a conference or something like that and completely change. Like you said, you've got to have your philosophy down, and then like that 20 or 5% you can adjust then and see what works for your your athletes and what doesn't, and then hopefully improve that 75% of your philosophy over time.
Absolutely. I think that's the one thing that, that would be certainly some advice that I'd give. And one of the things that I try and, talk to young coaches about in the position I'm in now, and when we've had sort of interaction with interns in the past roles that I also had, is you ask that question, do you have a philosophy? And it's important that, you ask the question quite early on to, raise awareness that, there's definitely no issue. And obviously I'd like to think that from my point of view, being in the industry for this long, that I've got a growth mindset, and I'm open to new ideas, and I'm open to kind of challenge and open to criticism. That's part of kind of evolving and being a good practitioner. But I think ask an intern or ask a young coach, what is your philosophy? Do you have a philosophy? And if they don't have a philosophy, you can then start to, have these conversations and go, well, if you don't have a philosophy, then, where are you headed with your program design, where you're headed with, how you deal with athletes face to face, and, all of those kind of questions that need to be answered for you to, successfully interact and, successfully ultimately get results with the athlete population that you're working with.
Yeah, definitely. So looking back at rugby, and, having spent a lot of time working as an S&C in rugby, and now you're in cricket, looking back into rugby, what do you think rugby can improve or should improve in terms of S&C?
I think just reflecting on my own personal career and how I kind of developed and how I kind of see it evolving from the more peripheral point now, I think a lot of people have strengths, and a lot of people have strengths in sort of the gym-based prescription and being comfortable in that sort of environment. I know my own personal kind of development would certainly be more on, the blend of gym-based physical development and field-based physical development. And I think, again, it's the kind of lots of media attention about, the All Blacks put skills before strength, and, the gym's not, a couple of well-known ex-players said, there's too much reliance on the gym-based prescription in our kind of current Northern Hemisphere culture. And I think that's the one thing that I'd certainly think that even, I try to blend, the strength foundation with the speed stimulus, with the high quality energy system work. I mean, I think that was one of the things that I tried to learn off other practitioners at the time when I was in the Cardiff Blues environment, for example. I wanted to know what the Leinster guys were doing, because at the time Leinster were in that kind of pomp of winning 2 or 3 Heineken Cups over a 3 or 4 year period. I obviously wanted to know that, you've obviously got exposure there now to Dan, and he was an excellent S&C coach. And that learning experience for me was the sort of the ultimate, right, I want to work on some high quality, high speed running elements. I want to work on some, obviously that speed stimulus, because a lot of actual rugby training doesn't maybe give you the right sort of stimulus when it comes to those high threshold, those high quality, training exposures for what I call the sort of most important physical qualities, the speeds, the strengths, the powers. I think they're the kind of qualities that are going to differentiate a team against the sort of the sub-elite, as they say in Australia. And I think that's the kind of thing that I would see now looking into to other environments, would be areas to sort of blend that, gym-based stuff with the field-based prescription, and try and get that balance, maybe more in favour of some field-based work. And, the strongman type stuff I was quite a big fan of at times in my sort of rugby S&C career. And there's times when it was much more kind of gym-based prescription, and the velocity-based, power and strength development work through tenders and gym awares, and the things now that are, like you say, commonplace on the Twitterverse and, mainstream. I think exposure to that quite early on in my career gave me that better understanding of, the differentiator between the speed strength qualities, the strength speed qualities, and obviously having objective measures for athletes can be a great kind of competitive environment to build gym culture. So I think that that sort of thing's here to stay, and I think that sort of thing's here to be encouraged. And I know that, whenever I wanted to do some sort of high quality speed work, I tried to integrate the speed gate so that every athlete or every player had had numbers, and then those numbers are meaningful, and those numbers will obviously ultimately create better outputs when you've got players being competitive with themselves, but also competitive against their peers. Nobody wants to be the slowest in the the 3x20 time trial. So it's kind of blending all of those things into the programming so that you get good quality outputs by the players and the athletes, because none of them want to get exposed as kind of not putting in 100%.
Yeah, competition's great. You just see when you put a jump mat in the middle of the gym and get all the guys to do their CMJ, and the environment is just lifted another 10-20%, just because that competition, and it's something that's great to be a part of. Now, you kind of touched on it again. You must know all my questions already, but anyway, you're talking a bit about kind of getting the sort of transfer from the gym to the pitch. Now, what would you tell maybe a young coach who's looking to get more transfer on out of the work he does in the gym onto the pitch? I mean, you touched on a few things there previously, but could you open up a bit more on that?
Yeah, I mean, just from I think a few kind of companies are starting to sort of look at this from an analytical standpoint. If you think about the breakdown of things like the scrummage, line out lifting, I think a lot of people in the gym, I just think I like to ask some sort of more difficult questions when it comes to sort of program design for a young coach, because if you think about, I don't know, forward scrum practice, 30 scrums, essentially in a squat mechanics type of situation, front row forwards, multiple lifts in a line out session, maybe or 20 to 30 push presses, for example. So for me, it's looking outside of that and going, okay, well, they've squatted already today, they've push pressed already today. So am I then going to prescribe push press and squat in their main kind of strength session for this phase, or is there a more intelligent way about getting kind of physical gains out of prescribing different exercises and the sort of rationale why? I mean, those are the sort of questions that I'd like to ask young coaches and think, okay, well, that heavy loading that they've obviously forwards may be different to backs, because the backs are likely to do more high speed running and more kind of technically speed stimulus type work in their field sessions. So it's just about kind of asking questions to try and build kind of good sequencing of program design and good sequence of session planning, so that essentially guys aren't basically push pressing 4 days a week and then asking them why they've got shoulder issues or why they've got knee issues, because essentially they've squatted 4 times a week without really seeing that bigger picture of kind of the tactical, technical components, and also, what demands are being placed on the players through their rugby training as well as their gym-based or their field-based kind of strength and conditioning.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely good advice for a young coach to actually take account of what's going on in those rugby sessions. You can't just solely look at your gym work. You've got to take everything into account, because ultimately the whole package is what drives the game performance, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's one of the things that I've learned as I've got older and more experience as a coach. Like I think I just said a while back, the realities of the X's and O's of kind of a strength program. You've got a template that you think is, this is it's not a one size fits all, but it's a good bang for your buck, high quality strength program. But the reality is, you've also got to look, I think, as a sort of more experienced coach, at the much bigger picture, which is the whole, and the whole is not just physical preparation, it's tactical and technical preparation, it's psychological, it's lifestyle, it's culture, it's all of those things that make up optimal performance. And I think as a coach who obviously gets promoted and gets a little bit more seniority, you do look at the bigger picture. I mean, as I've got older as a coach, I've thought much more about nutrition, I've thought much more about lifestyle. Those things are much more impactful for me on performance than sometimes 3 sets of 3 or 5 sets of 3, which is going to be more optimal for the player. I think those kind of little details start to become less and less relevant, and more relevant is that bigger picture sort of thought process. And hopefully that's some lessons that younger coaches can sort of take away and think more carefully about.
Yeah, for sure. Now, this is a question we ask to all our guests on the podcast. What do you think is the biggest mistake rugby players make when it comes to S&C?
Yeah, big one. I think from my experience, not taking their recovery as seriously or not valuing it as much as they think they might. So what I mean by that, to qualify, would be diligence after the game. I know that there's nutritional elements, there's obviously lots of different recovery methodologies that can be employed. But for me, and I see it, I don't want to get anyone in trouble at the Northampton Saints, and I certainly won't name names, but I see players training on their days off regularly, even if it's just, chest and arms, beach weights, whatever it might be. I think that accumulated fatigue that obviously is a huge, huge factor in a long, competitive, arduous season for a professional player. I think they've really got to take their recovery seriously. And I'm not saying do nothing on a day off, because I'm a massive fan of mobility and active recovery and, making sure that your body moves as efficiently as possible. But the reality is, if you're doing extra weights on your day off, then something's not quite right with the prescription that you've been given at your club. Because for me, I don't want players training on their days off, because that's defeating the purpose of a day off in my view.
Yeah, and just for some of our listeners and members back home, what would be a good way to spend that day off if they still want to do something? You mentioned a couple there before.
For me, I think it's active recovery is a big one for me. I think even if it's a 20 or 30 minute mobility session, there's always, we both know that to move efficiently, you need mobility in your ankle, hip and thoracic spine. I've got a couple of little sequences that I put together for our playing group, so that if they want to go to the gym for 20 minutes, half an hour, then there's sort of a purposeful half an hour in there. Obviously things like, your pool recoveries. I'm a big fan of hot-cold contrast therapy. Even things like having a magnesium salts bath, little things that kind of continually help you as an athlete perform optimally come your sort of game exposure. You don't have to leave the house to have a magnesium bath, obviously, but the reality is you can always, on your day off, you can do something productive that's going to help your performance. You don't have to go to the gym and, eat into that day with, a chest and arms workout. And, I just think, just being almost, be proactive, but not necessarily destructive to the overall program design and like what the clubs develop for you.
Yeah.
So I think they've got the best interest at heart for that player's personal development, and recovery days are important, and decompression away from sport is very important. But I still think as an athlete, you've got sort of responsibility to, be in as best condition as you can possibly be in. So helping yourself with half an hour or an hour's worth of proactive recovery is going to be helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Just lastly, because I'm conscious of time, Chris, where can people learn a bit more about you?
I have a Twitter account. I'm Chris Toom 71, very original, at Twitter, and I think I'm Chris Toom 71 on Instagram as well. I do try to use social media for positive reasons. For me, it's about learning and sharing good information. You've obviously got coaches that you can interact with, and I'd like to think that over the years I've built quite a nice little professional network that reaches, from Australia to, the far shores of North America. And yeah, Instagram, I do tend to just chuck a bit of stuff on there with regards to exercises and a few little tips. But it's not necessarily the best portal for strength and conditioning only content. So Twitter's probably the best one for me.
Yeah, and of course we'll share links to both of those in the show notes. But Chris, thanks so much for taking the time to speak to us. Great insight into your career, and loads of take homes for upcoming strength coaches, and training information for players as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jamie. Really appreciate it, and I'll look forward to the feedback as and when it comes in.
Cheers,
Thanks
Chris.
very much. Cheers.
So there you go. I think you'll agree, definitely a great podcast, loads of great insights from a very experienced strength and conditioning coach, especially like what Chris said about the strength foundation and how important it is. You get that right first, and other physical qualities, will improve, and you've got a great base to improve them as well. So loads of take-homes for, athletes or up-and-coming strength and conditioning coaches. So we'd like to thank Chris for taking the time to talk to us. In the meantime, at rugbyrenegade.com, loads of articles coming out. There'll be more podcasts, of course. We've just released a new ebook called Bigger for Rugby, which is a must-read if you want to increase your muscle mass and improve performance for rugby. It's a great program. It'll be a lot of fun to do, and you'll get great results and put on some lean muscle mass too. So check that out. And of course, to keep up to date with the podcast, subscribe to us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, or TuneIn, and give us a 5-star review. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to the Rugby Renegade podcast. For more quality rugby strength and conditioning information, check us out at rugbyrenegade.com. Rugby Renegade, building machines.